Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell, and with me is our reporter, Carlene Johnson, who's been covering the Washington State legislative session that formally concluded earlier this week. One of the major discussions that went on this session was whether or not to close a state-operated school for people with severe intellectual and development disabilities. Carlene, I'm curious, what made this discussion such a big deal?
I guess because it's so emotionally charged to begin with, right? You've got some of the most vulnerable people in the state that live at Rainier School and Yakama Valley School. These are folks, as you mentioned, with, pretty serious intellectual, developmental disabilities, oftentimes combined with some, medically fragile folks, right? So these are often people that the disabilities are so severe that their own family members, as much as they love them and want to take care for them, can't do it on their own. So at Rainier School, it's, a habilitation center. So these people live there. They also receive, medical care if they need it. There's a lot of staff members there for the 58 current residents. A lot more staff members than residents, but they're giving them job skills. Oftentimes these people do have jobs in the community. And they offer the transportation to and from, counseling, you name it, any kind of, intense services that need to be offered for these folks are provided at Rainier School. But it is a lot different than it was 50 years ago, right? I mean, anybody thinking about someone who's, being held against their will, institutional, care, that's not something you want to imagine a person being forced to stay at a position like that in a facility like that. So the fight has been highly, emotional from the beginning. I sat in, I don't even know how many hearings as this bill, because there was a House version and a Senate version. It was the Senate bill, 5393 that ended up ultimately, passing on the very last day of session. It was at one point considered dead, just because it was just so highly charged. And then it was came back to life. And the version that ended up passing on last day of session Sunday, was, palpable for a lot of Republicans that were fighting this thing tooth and nail from day one. And the reason why, ultimately they came back and said, yeah, many of them, said, I can support this, is because, the bill was amended such that Rainier School will not close completely until the very last person there has been placed into a suitable community setting, a group home, setting. And, it's going to remain open until, so really there's no end date on closing.
So what was the reason for closing the school?
DSHS, Department of Social and Health Services, has pushed for this for years. They were ultimately in charge of Rainier School. And there's been a lot of pressure from activists in the community to basically say, we can do better by these people. We can have them in group homes and provide the services there. The problem is these, SOLAs, really don't exist in the community settings that we'd like to imagine that they do. And it's not as easy as just saying, okay, we're going to expand this group home, or we're going to create a group home here and offer all the services that Rainier does, and, make that happen. So they were basically the earlier version of the bill, TJ, was shut this baby down. And here's going to be the date for it. And you better have these community settings in place by then. Well, the pushback from everybody at Rainier School, basically, and the staff there, who tearfully pleaded, with lawmakers during session to say, wait a minute, you guys, it's not that easy. And they showed examples of what happened, like in the state of Georgia. Georgia did something similar to this, and more than 100 people that had been in a setting like Rainier School ended up dying in the couple of years after, because the services weren't the same.
When we're talking about severe intellectual and development disabilities, what exactly, for people who are unfamiliar, what are some of the reasons people are in a school like this? What's keeping them functioning outside of the school to the point where their own families can't care for them?
Well, you can imagine someone with very severe disabilities. Some of the people that live at Rainier School, but came to Olympia to testify are nonverbal, right? But maybe, so they've got the system that they can speak into or type into or, whatever with their eyes, right? Able to then communicate. But maybe they also have medical issues that, require 24-hour care, many of these people. But in a setting like Rainier School, they're able to receive all of those, different types of care. And many of them, the goal is get these people back into a community setting, if at all possible. But for some, it's not possible. And many of these people are also elderly. So perhaps a caregiver they had at some point has now passed on. And so there wasn't anybody to take care of them. There was a woman who, testified at a couple of these hearings, basically crediting Rainier School with saving her son's life. He has very severe disabilities and ended up out on the street and then was in a hospital for a while, months and months, and was suicidal as a result of being kept in the hospital because there was no place to take him, TJ. Ultimately, a place opened up, a bed, if you will, at Rainier School, and he's now doing so much better there. She said he's actually working in the community a couple of days a week and receiving the services. And she said he's happier than he's ever been because he's contributing now to society. Credits the school with saving her son's life.
You said that activists were interested in closing the school. I'm just curious, were any of these activists representing a specific individual from the school or a group of individuals? Were there any individuals who are at the school who testified and said that they want out? I mean,
there were no residents there from the facility that live at Rainier or Yakama Valley that testified, saying, I want out, they won't let me out. Yeah, that's a really good question. There was none of that. There were those who testified at some of these hearings that are now in, group homes or other, still state operated facilities, but a much smaller setting, right? Folks that testified that said, this is a better setting for me. This works for me now. But there was no argument from anybody that's staff at Rainier or folks that were pushing back against shutting down the school that isn't ideal. That's what's ideal, right? For everybody, get them out of a state operated, school and get them into, a more residential setting. Of course, that's optimal for everybody. And that works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everyone. So
as you know, the state legislature has been facing a, multi-billion-dollar shortfall due to, record high revenue still not keeping up with spending, priorities. And so the idea was to close this to save money. How much money are we talking about here? That was the problem because when initially there was going to be closed both Rainier and Yakama Valley, then it was leave Yakama Valley open only for respite care. Then it was remove Yakama Valley from any plan to close already. Now Yakama Valley is already under the same amended version of the bill that ended up passing 5393 for Rainier School. They haven't taken new folks already for a number of years. They're already, operating under the same model that Rainier will be under now, like no new intakes, just take care of the folks that are there. But the problem is once they removed Yakama Valley from the bill to be completely and just keep Rainier School as it is, the cost savings were eliminated completely. And there also it was indeterminate in the fiscal note for this bill, TJ, what the cost is still going to be, because just because you're shutting down Rainier School and in theory, then shifting those staff members into some of these smaller residential group home settings, there wasn't like, okay, this is going to shut down the school. It's going to save, a few $100 million. But they didn't say what the cost is going to be for shifting these folks to those other settings. There's still going to be staff. There's still, in some cases, you're going to have potentially more staff because
you're moving these people into different, group homes all over the state. And then there was the argument too, the other argument that was made from family members that have, loved ones at Rainier School in Buckley. They said they'd moved their residences to be close so that they could see their loved ones at Rainier School. And others have done that for Yakama Valley as well. So you've got that piece where they're going, okay, wait, you shut this down. Where are you going to move my loved one to? Then do I have to sell my home and move to be close to them? So many issues. Ultimately, the bill that passed was a compromise that seemed to work for obviously enough Republicans and Democrats to get passed. And it appears at this point the governor will sign 5393 into law. He hasn't, at least publicly, he has not voiced any opposition to the bill.
Gotcha. Well, we'll have to keep an eye on this story as it develops further, and interesting to see what if Ferguson. I'm guessing he's going to sign the bill. So listeners can keep up with this story and others at thecentirsquare.com. Thanks for listening. This is your host TJ Martinell, and thanks for listening to Washington in Focus.